Look inside the walls of almost any modern home built in the last 70 years, and you will find the exact same thing. A creeping, fluffy sea of pink or yellow synthetic fibers packed tightly between wooden studs. This is fiberglass, a manufactured cocktail of spun glass, melted sand, and chemical binders. It is the undisputed king of the $75 billion global insulation market. We accept it without question. We stuff it into our attics, we line our bedrooms with it, and we live out our lives surrounded by it. We are told by the titans of modern construction that this is the absolute pinnacle of building technology. We are told it is the most efficient, cost-effective way to keep the winter cold out and the summer heat in. But this is a manufactured reality. What if the perfect building material was not invented in a 20th century corporate laboratory? What if it was perfected by the Earth itself over millions of years of evolution? Imagine a material that regulates temperature with flawless precision, actively pulls toxic carbon out of the atmosphere, and naturally repels mold and pests without a single drop of chemical treatment. A material so structurally resilient that ancient empires used it to build monuments that are still standing today. A material that, most terrifyingly to the modern chemical and housing industries, costs almost nothing to grow. It requires no deep mining, no massive industrial smelting, and no toxic byproducts. It is a material so vastly superior to spun synthetic glass that the only way to stop it from dominating the global construction market was to make it a federal crime. To understand the magnitude of this deception, we must leave the toxic, chemically sealed boxes we call modern homes and travel back in time. We must look to the ancient world, to civilizations that built for eternity rather than for a 30-year mortgage cycle. In the western Indian state of Maharashtra lie the Ellora Caves. Carved directly into the basalt rock of the Charanandri Hills in the 6th century, these 34 monumental temples are a marvel of ancient engineering. For over a millennium, archaeologists marveled at how these structures survived the brutal Indian monsoons, the punishing heat, and the relentless march of time, remaining pristine while neighboring cave complexes like the Ajanta Caves suffered massive degradation from insects and humidity. In 2016, scientists from the surrounding region finally uncovered the secret. The builders of the Ellora Caves had plastered the stone walls with a specific mixture. It was a blend of clay, lime, and the chopped woody core of the cannabis sativa plant, hemp. The ancient Indians understood something that modern corporate builders have deliberately tried to erase. When the inner core of the hemp stalk, known as the hurd, is mixed with a lime binder, it does not just dry, it petrifies. The ancient mixture used in the Ellora Caves had actively regulated the humidity inside the temples for 1,500 years, starving out destructive insects and preventing the growth of structural mold. This was not an isolated, regional phenomenon. The Merovingian dynasty of 6th century France used identical hemp and lime mixtures to construct the abutments of their bridges. The Romans utilized it in their vast engineering projects. For thousands of years, hemp was the undisputed workhorse of human civilization. It provided the canvas for the sails that crossed oceans, the paper for the texts that founded nations, and the binding strength for the homes that sheltered generations. The biological architecture of the hemp plant is nothing short of an evolutionary miracle. It is designed to survive, to adapt, and to outlast. The magic lies in the microscopic structure of the hemp hurd. If you place a cross-section of the hemp stalk under a high-powered microscope, you will not see a solid block of wood. You will see a highly complex honeycomb-like matrix of porous cells. It looks like a microscopic sponge. This cellular structure gives hemp a property that synthetic fiberglass can never replicate: high vapor permeability combined with massive thermal mass. Modern fiberglass insulation is entirely dead. It is a passive barrier. It attempts to stop heat transfer by trapping pockets of dead air between shards of glass. But fiberglass has a fatal flaw. If it gets wet, if even a fraction of humidity penetrates the wall cavity, it fails catastrophically. Fiberglass insulation can lose up to 50% of its thermal resistance, its R value, with just a 1.5% increase in moisture. It slumps. It compacts. It becomes a breeding ground for toxic black mold. Modern homes are built wrapped in layers of plastic vapor barriers to protect the fragile fiberglass, effectively sealing the human occupants inside a plastic bag, suffocating the architecture and trapping stale, toxic air indoors. Hemp insulation does not hide from moisture. It manages it. It thrives in it. Because of its microscopic honeycomb structure, a hemp-lined wall is entirely breathable. It is hygroscopic. When the ambient humidity inside a house rises, the hemp hurd absorbs the moisture vapor. As the vapor enters the microscopic pores of the plant, a fascinating law of physics takes over. The vapor condenses into liquid within the pores, and in doing so, it releases latent heat. The wall actually warms up. In the summer, when the temperature rises, the moisture evaporates out of the pores, absorbing heat and actively cooling the wall down. It is not a dead barrier, it is a living, breathing thermal engine. When you take this miraculous plant herd and mix it with water and powdered limestone, you create what the modern underground building movement calls hempcrete. And this is where the science transitions from impressive to undeniable. When water hits the powdered lime, it triggers a chemical reaction. The calcium hydroxide begins to absorb carbon dioxide directly out of the atmosphere, attempting to revert to its original state: solid calcium carbonate, limestone. As it does this, it binds tightly around the high silica hemp fibers. The result is a building material that actively cleans the air. 1 cubic meter of hempcrete permanently sequesters up to 360 pounds of carbon dioxide. Instead of emitting toxic volatile organic compounds like modern synthetic insulation, it heals the environment around it. And over a period of years, the wall literally turns to solid stone. But the most staggering contrast between this ancient plant and modern synthetics is revealed in the presence of fire. If you hold a 1500-degree blowtorch directly to a block of hempcrete, a mesmerizing thing happens. Nothing. It does not ignite. It does not spread a flame. It does not melt. The lime coating protects the fibrous herd, and the material merely chars on the surface. It is fundamentally fireproof. Now, apply that same blowtorch to modern fiberglass. At roughly 1000 degrees Fahrenheit, the chemical binders evaporate into highly toxic, carcinogenic black smoke. Shortly after, the glass itself melts into a useless, searing liquid, leaving the wooden bones of the modern home entirely exposed to the inferno. Hemp outperforms synthetic fiberglass in structural integrity, thermal regulation, moisture management, carbon sequestration, and fire resistance. And it grows from a seed to a 15-foot-tall, harvestable crop in just 120 days. It requires no pesticides. It detoxifies the soil it grows in. It is a weed. It is free, unbridled, natural abundance. So why is your house stuffed with toxic pink glass? Why is the world wrapped in synthetics? Because you cannot patent a weed. You cannot build a centralized, multi-billion-dollar monopoly on a plant that any farmer can grow in a ditch. The science was never the point. The eradication of hemp from the American landscape was one of the most calculated, ruthless, and successful corporate assassinations in human history. The stage for this assassination was set in the 1930s. America was in the grip of the Great Depression, but behind closed doors, a new era of industrial empires was being forged. The age of synthetics had arrived. In the mid-1930s, the chemical giant DuPont was busy patenting the processes that would define modern consumerism. They had just invented nylon, a synthetic fiber derived from petroleum designed to replace natural fibers. They were heavily invested in heavily chemical processes for manufacturing plastics and paper from wood pulp. Around this exact same time, a coalition of glass manufacturers, which would soon become the corporate titan Owens Corning, was perfecting the process of spinning glass fibers into bulk insulation. Simultaneously, William Randolph Hearst, the ruthless newspaper tycoon, was sitting on a massive empire of timber holdings. His millions of acres of forests supplied the wood pulp required to feed his nationwide network of newspapers. DuPont, Owens Corning, and Hearst all shared one massive existential threat: hemp. In February 1938, Popular Mechanics magazine published a landmark article. They declared hemp the new billion-dollar crop. A new machine, the decorticator, had just been invented, automating the separation of the hemp fiber from the herd. For the first time in modern history, hemp could be processed cheaply and efficiently on an industrial scale. The threat to the emerging synthetic cartels was absolute. Hemp produced 4 times more paper per acre than timber, without the need for toxic sulfuric acid bleaching. Hemp fibers were far stronger and more durable than the newly patented, expensive nylon. And the woody herd, when processed, created a building and insulation material that threatened to render the newly patented fiberglass entirely obsolete before it even reached the market. If hemp were allowed to flourish with modern processing technology, the timber barons would lose their monopoly, the chemical conglomerates would lose their synthetic fiber markets, and the fiberglass insulation industry would be smothered in its crib. A natural resource of unimaginable abundance was standing in the way of massive, centralized corporate profits. The plant had to die. Enter Harry Anslinger. Anslinger was the first commissioner of the newly created Federal Bureau of Narcotics. He was also, conveniently, deeply connected to the chemical and timber cartels. He was appointed to his position by his uncle-in-law, Andrew Mellon, the Secretary of the Treasury, who happened to be the chief financial backer of DuPont. Anslinger became the tip of the spear for the corporate monopolies. He could not ban hemp by attacking its industrial properties. It was too useful, too historically significant. So, he executed a brilliant, dark psychological operation. He deliberately conflated the towering, non-psychoactive industrial hemp plant with its shorter, narcotic cousin marijuana. Anslinger partnered with Hearst's nationwide newspaper empire to launch a campaign of terror. The yellow journalism machine went into overdrive. Hearst's papers printed sensationalized, racially charged, and entirely fabricated stories about the dangers of a new drug called marijuana, carefully avoiding the word hemp, which the American public recognized as a harmless agricultural staple. They manufactured a panic, and under the cover of this manufactured panic, they introduced the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. The hearings for this act were brief, unscientific, and entirely controlled by cartel interests. The only real medical authority to testify was Dr. William C. Woodward, legislative counsel for the American Medical Association. Dr. Woodward stood before Congress and pointed out the blatant deception. He noted that the AMA had no idea that the marijuana the government was trying to ban was actually the standard cannabis plant that had been used in medicine and industry for centuries. He protested the lack of scientific evidence. He warned Congress that the bill was a disguise. He was swiftly mocked, shouted down, and dismissed from the chamber. The Marijuana Tax Act passed. It placed an exorbitant, impossible tax on all cannabis cultivation, completely failing to distinguish between psychoactive marijuana and the industrial hemp plant that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson had grown on their own estates. With the stroke of a pen, a 10,000-year-old agricultural staple was made functionally illegal. The decorticator machines went silent. The fields were burned. The knowledge of natural lime hemp building materials was quietly erased from the architectural textbooks. The artificial scarcity was complete. The market was now a blank slate. With hemp eradicated, the post-war housing boom of the 1940s and 1950s belonged entirely to the cartels. Owens Corning pushed their pink fiberglass into the walls of every new suburban development in America. The timber industry standardized the thin profile, 2x4 wooden frame, perfectly spaced to accommodate precisely cut bats of toxic synthetic insulation. They rewrote the building codes. They established the American Society for Testing and Materials Standards, creating arbitrary metrics that heavily favored synthetic materials. They mandated high R values and impossibly thin wall profiles, a metric that completely ignored the superior thermal mass and phase change properties of natural, breathable walls. They engineered a legal environment where building a house out of natural, petrifying, fireproof stone and plant matter was not just unconventional, it was a violation of local zoning laws. We have lived inside their manufactured reality for 3 generations. We have watched our homes rot from the inside out, plagued by black mold because they cannot breathe. We have spent billions of dollars running high-powered HVAC systems to artificially heat and cool our dead, uninsulated wooden boxes. We have suffered through epidemics of sick building syndrome, breathing in the microscopic glass fibers and formaldehyde off-gassing from the pink bats degrading in our attics. We have watched helplessly as modern homes, built with synthetic framing and chemical insulation, burned to the ground in minutes, reaching flashover temperatures twice as fast as homes built just 50 years prior. We have paid the ultimate price for their profit margins. But the fatal flaw in any system built on artificial scarcity is that nature is inherently abundant. You can ban a plant, you can tax it into oblivion, and you can write it out of the building codes, but you cannot change its biology. The plant came back. It is growing right now, at the edge of rural highways, in the ditches, in the forgotten patches of poor soil where nothing else will take root. It is pulling carbon from the sky, its deep tap roots quietly breaking up compacted earth, waiting to be utilized. In recent years, the iron grip of the 1937 deception has finally begun to fracture. The passing of recent agricultural acts has slowly, grudgingly, begun to distinguish industrial hemp from narcotics once again. A quiet revolution is taking place in the shadows of the construction industry. Architects, builders, and historians are rediscovering the ancient recipes of the Ellora Caves and the Merovingian engineers. They are mixing the chopped herd with lime and water. They are watching it turn to stone. They are holding blowtorches to it, watching the fire fail against the resilience of nature. They are realizing that true efficiency does not come from a chemical plant. It comes from the soil. The $75 billion synthetic insulation empire is built on a foundation of sand, glass, and lies. They convinced the world that a home must be a sealed, toxic plastic bag. They made it illegal to build a home that breathes, a home that actively heals the environment, a home that refuses to burn. They suppressed the biological miracle of hemp because it threatened to set humanity free from their chemical dependency. But the truth, much like the plant itself, is too resilient to stay buried forever. The knowledge has survived. The seeds are still here. And the walls of their manufactured reality are finally beginning to crumble.